They called her a goddess of destruction, but the human treated her like a woman, the broken machine and the silent storm. The life support system on Station Helios wheezed like an old man climbing stairs, and Juno Reeves was elbow-deep in its mechanical guts when the entire galaxy decided to have a panic attack. Station Evacuation Protocol 77 Alpha. The intercom crackled with barely contained hysteria. All personnel to emergency shuttles. This is not a drill. The Kyrathi war goddess approaches. Juno didn't look up from the maze of quantum regulators he was untangling. Yeah, he muttered to the machine. I know you're scared too, but if I don't fix you in the next 20 minutes, we're all breathing vacuum anyway. The life support gave a pitiful mechanical whimper, as if it understood. Around him, the station emptied with the efficiency of water draining from a bathtub. Boots thundered past his maintenance alcove. Voices shouted coordinates and trajectories, and somewhere in the distance someone was openly weeping. Juno had seen this dance before. Different threats, same choreography. Pirates, plague ships, rogue AIs, and now apparently a living weapon with a goddess complex. He'd missed the initial briefing naturally. He'd been 3 levels down in the recycling plant, sweet-talking a water processor that had developed what he could only describe as trust issues. By the time he'd crawled back to the main levels, the only person left to explain the situation was Lieutenant Torres, who was stuffing emergency rations into a duffel bag with the frantic energy of a man packing for the apocalypse. She's real, Reeves, Torres had said, not looking up from his packing. Lysandra of the Kyrathi, 7 feet tall, silver skin, eyes like dying stars. They say she can unmake matter with a thought, turned the entire Meridian fleet into cosmic dust just by looking at them wrong. Sounds efficient, Juno had replied, which earned him a look that suggested Torres thought he was either very brave or very stupid. Now, 20 minutes later, the station was a tomb of empty corridors and flickering emergency lights. Juno remained, in his alcove, surrounded by the familiar chaos of spare parts, diagnostic tools, and the mechanical breathing of a station trying not to die. The quantum regulator cluster looked like someone had taken a perfectly good piece of engineering and put it through a blender operated by a drunk octopus. Half the connections were corroded. 2 of the processing cores were running backward, and the primary stabilizer was making a noise that Juno's grandfather would have described as like a cat being murdered by a robot. Okay, sweetheart, he said to the machine, because talking to broken things helped him think. Let's see what's got you all twisted up inside. The temperature dropped. It wasn't gradual, the way station climate control usually shifted. One moment the air was the usual, recycled warmth of human habitation, and the next it was sharp enough to make his breath visible. The emergency lights flickered, casting shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources. Juno looked up from his work and saw her. She stood at the far end of the corridor like a silver statue come to life. 7 feet tall, just as Torres had said, with skin that reflected the emergency lighting in ways that made his eyes water. Her hair fell in liquid mercury waves, and her eyes, Torres had been wrong about the eyes. They weren't like dying stars. They were like the space between stars, dark and vast and full of things that had never learned human names. She moved toward him with the fluid grace of something that had never needed to worry about friction or gravity or any of the small limitations that kept the rest of the universe honest. The corridor seemed to bend around her presence, reality making subtle adjustments to accommodate something that didn't quite fit within its usual parameters. Juno blinked, wiped his hands on his jumpsuit, and turned back to the quantum regulator. If you're here to unmake the station, he called over his shoulder, could you maybe wait about 15 minutes? I'm trying to fix the life support, and if I don't get this stabilizer aligned, the whole thing's going to cascade into a feedback loop that'll turn the air processors into very expensive paperweights. Behind him, the sound of her footsteps stopped. He glanced back and saw her standing perfectly still, her head tilted at an angle that suggested she was processing information that didn't compute. Her lips, silver like the rest of her, parted, slightly as if she were about to speak, then closed again. I mean, if universal destruction is on a schedule, I get it, Juno continued, turning back to his work. But personally, I'd prefer not to suffocate before the cosmic horror stuff kicks in. Professional pride, you know? He heard her take another step closer. The temperature dropped another few degrees, and the hair on his arms stood up like it was trying to escape his skin. "You are not afraid," she said, and her voice was like hearing silk being cut with a knife made of winter. "Of suffocating?" "Yeah, terrified." "Of you?" Juno shrugged, tracing a corroded connection with one finger. "I figure if you wanted me dead, I'd already be dead. Plus, you don't exactly strike me as the type who needs to sneak up on people." He pulled a replacement conductor from his toolkit and began the delicate process of swapping it out. "Besides, I'm too tired to be properly afraid right now. You know how it is. 4 straight shifts trying to keep this bucket of bolts from falling apart, living on coffee and spite. Fear requires energy I don't have." Another step closer. He could feel her presence now, like standing next to a thunderstorm that was pretending to be a person. "They evacuated because of me," she said. "Yeah, probably smart on their part." Juno tested the new connection, smiled when it sparked to life. "I would have too if I hadn't been stuck down here playing mechanical therapist. Speaking of which..." He turned around and looked up at her, craning his neck to meet those impossible eyes. "You wouldn't happen to know anything about quantum field harmonics, would you?" For a moment, she just stared at him. Up close, he could see that her silver skin wasn't quite uniform. There were patterns in it, like circuit traces or the veins of leaves that pulsed with faint light. Her presence pressed against his thoughts, not intrusive but noticeable, like someone standing just outside his peripheral vision. "I know many things," she said finally. "Great. See this mess?" He gestured to the regulator cluster. "The quantum fields are oscillating about 15% out of phase with each other. Normally I'd just reset the whole array, but half the control circuits are fried, and if I shut it down wrong, the cascade will take out the atmospheric processors." She moved closer, close enough that he could see his reflection in her silver features. When she leaned down to examine the machinery, her hair fell forward like liquid metal, and Juno caught a scent like ozone in winter mornings. "The harmonic resonance is unstable," she said after a moment. "Right? I've been trying to manually adjust the field generators, but they keep drifting back to the same broken frequency. It's like the machine wants to stay broken." Something that might have been surprise flickered across her features. "You speak of it as if it were alive. Aren't they all, kind of?" Juno reached past her to adjust a control dial, acutely aware that his arm was inches from someone who could supposedly turn him into constituent atoms. "I mean, they respond to input, they have patterns of behavior, they get sick and need healing. This girl here," he patted the regulator housing affectionately, "she's been running scared ever since the last solar storm. All her responses are defensive, like she's afraid of getting hurt again." Lysandra, he assumed that was who she was unless the galaxy was having a particularly weird day, straightened slowly, her eyes fixed on his face with an intensity that made him feel like a specimen under a microscope. "You would heal it," she said. "Well, yeah, that's the job. Even knowing what I am, what I could do to you." Juno considered this, then shrugged. "Look, no offense, but I've got bigger problems right now than whatever cosmic horror thing you've got going on. This station supports 12,000 people. If I don't fix this, they don't have a home to come back to." He turned back to the machinery, missing the way her expression shifted, silver features rearranging themselves into something that might have been wonder. "Besides," he added, pulling out his portable field scanner, "you haven't actually done anything yet. Everyone else saw War Goddess and ran screaming, but all I see is someone who knows about quantum harmonics and isn't trying to stop me from doing my job." The silence stretched long enough that he looked back at her. She was studying him with the focused attention of someone trying to solve a puzzle that didn't have all its pieces. "What?" he asked. "They call me the storm that walks," she said. "The ender of fleets, the silver death." "Okay." Juno waited for more, and when it didn't come, he said, "I'm Juno. I fix things." Another silence, this one somehow deeper. "Would you..." she began, then stopped. Started again. "Would you like assistance?" He blinked. "You want to help me fix the life support?" I understand quantum mechanics. Well, sure, but he caught himself before he could say something stupid about war goddesses and manual labor. Instead, he said, "You sure you want to get your hands dirty? This is pretty basic stuff." For the first time since she'd appeared, Lysandra smiled. It was small, barely a curve of silver lips, but it transformed her face entirely. "I think," she said, "I would like to try being useful instead of feared." Juno grinned and handed her a diagnostic scanner. "Welcome to the most boring job in the galaxy. Try not to unmake anything by accident." When gods remember how to laugh, the empanadas were perfect, which meant the universe was about to go catastrophically wrong. Tomás Castillo had learned this rule through 30 years of running food carts on the worst outposts in human space. The better his cooking turned out, the more likely something was to explode, catch fire, or try to eat him. Today's batch of beef and potato empanadas had achieved that perfect golden brown crispness that made grown miners weep with joy, which meant he was probably about to die. He was arranging them in the warming tray when reality tore open behind. His coffee machine. The rip in space made a sound like silk being shredded by claws, and through it stepped something that his brain initially refused to process. Shadow-made flesh, darkness wearing the approximate shape of a woman with eyes like twin black holes and skin that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. She stumbled, caught herself against his prep counter, and left a handprint of what looked like liquid night on the stainless steel surface. "Coño," Tomás muttered, because 30 years of frontier cooking had taught him to swear first and ask questions later. "You're bleeding on my workspace." The shadow woman looked up at him, those impossible eyes widening with what might have been surprise. Up close, he could see that she wasn't made of darkness. She was a woman, probably human-adjacent, wearing some kind of adaptive camouflage that bent light around her. The blood dripping from a gash in her shoulder was silver-black and moved like it had opinions about gravity. "You can see me," she said, and her voice was like hearing whispers from the bottom of a well. "Lady, you're 7 feet of spooky standing in my food cart. Of course I can see you." Tomás grabbed a clean kitchen towel and tossed it to her. "Press that against the wound. You're dripping exotic fluids into my flour." She caught the towel with reflexes that made his eyes water, then just stood there holding it like she'd never seen cloth before. "You're Nix Vorthak," he said, because he might run a taco cart on the ass end of nowhere, but he still watched the news feeds. The Shadowkin Empress, the ghost of the Outer Rim. "I am," she said, and there was something almost defiant in the way she said it, like she was daring him to run screaming. "Well, Your Majesty, you're also bleeding in my kitchen, so unless you want me to charge you extra for biohazard cleanup, use the damn towel." For a moment, she just stared at him. Then, slowly, she pressed the cloth against her shoulder. The silver-black blood immediately began eating through the fabric. "Ay, Dios mío," Tomás sighed. "What is that stuff, liquid acid?" "Shadowkin blood is corrosive to most materials," she said, watching the towel dissolve with what looked like embarrassment. "Right, of course it is." He grabbed a polymer cutting board and handed it to her. "Here, use this. It's rated for industrial solvents." She took it, still looking at him like he was some kind of alien life form. "You are not afraid. Honey, I've been running food carts for 3 decades. You know what's scary? A health inspector with a bad attitude and a portable testing kit. You know what's not scary? A customer who needs first aid." He turned back to his prep station, checking the empanadas. Besides, anyone who bleeds can be hurt, and anyone who can be hurt is just people. Behind him, he heard her make a sound that might have been a laugh, or might have been a sob. The proximity alarm started wailing. "Ah, shit," Tomás said, glancing at his security display. 3 ships were dropping out of hyperspace. Sleek hunter-killer designs that screamed military contractor. "Let me guess. Friends of yours?" Nix had gone perfectly still, her form flickering between visible and something that hurt to look at, directly. "Bounty hunters, they've been tracking me for 3 systems. How much are you worth?" 50 million credits. Tomás whistled, impressed despite himself. Damn, lady, what did you do, steal their lunch money? I destroyed a slaver convoy, killed 17 captains, freed 4,000 people. She said it matter-of-factly, like she was reciting a grocery list. Well, that explains the price tag. He started shutting down his cooking surfaces, muscle memory from years of emergency evacuations. You got a plan, or are we just winging it? We. She turned to stare at him, shadows writhing around her like living smoke. You're in my cart, bleeding on my equipment. That makes you my customer, and I don't let people mess with my customers. He finished securing the gas lines and started packing emergency supplies. Plus, those hunters are going to trash my kitchen when they get here, and I just finished the monthly deep clean. The first hunter ship touched down in the clearing outside his cart, landing thrusters scorching the permacrete. Through the small window, Thomas could see figures in powered armor deploying, weapons charged and ready. There are 12 of them, Nick said, and her voice had gone flat and professional. Military-grade enhancement, plasma rifles, probably. Neural dampeners to counter my phasing abilities. Sounds rough. Tomas pulled a plasma cutter from his emergency kit. Officially, it was for dealing with stuck equipment, but it would work just fine on armor. You know what their problem is? What? They're thinking like soldiers. All tactics and firepower and superior position. He grinned at her, the expression probably looking slightly unhinged in the cart's harsh lighting. But this is my kitchen. And I've been feeding people in hostile territory for 30 years. I know every trick in the book. The hunters were spreading out now, surrounding the cart in a textbook containment formation. Their leader, a man whose armor was decorated with kill marks, stepped forward with the confidence of someone who'd never met a problem he couldn't shoot. Nix Vorthak, he called, his voice amplified by suit speakers. You're surrounded. Surrender now, and we'll take you alive. Counter-offer, Tomas shouted back, sticking his head out the service window. You leave my customer alone and I won't have to get creative with the kitchen equipment. The hunter leader turned toward him, and Tomas could practically hear the eye roll through the helmet. Civilian, evacuate the area. This doesn't concern you. Actually, it does. See, this is my place of business and you're loitering without buying anything. That's bad for property values. Behind him, Nix made a sound that was definitely a laugh this time. Short and sharp, but genuine. Sir, one of the other hunters said, thermal shows 2 heat signatures in the cart. The target's not alone. Then we take them both, the leader replied. Vorthak, last chance, come out or we come in. How about door number 3? Tomas called back and triggered the emergency release on his propane reserve. The explosion wasn't huge. He wasn't trying to level the place, just create some chaos, but it was spectacular. A ball of orange flame billowed out from the cart's rear vents, followed by a cloud of flour and spices that turned the air into a choking, blinding fog. In the confusion, Nix moved. She didn't phase through dimensions, didn't become shadow and nightmare. Instead, she grabbed the plasma cutter from his hands and went out the back exit at a run, moving like someone who knew exactly how normal people fought and die. Tomas followed, carrying a sack of his best empanadas because priorities were priorities even during firefights. The hunters were shouting, trying to coordinate through the flour fog while their thermal imaging went haywire from the residual heat of the explosion. Nix ducked around the side of the cart, using the bulk of the vehicle for cover, and Tomas realized she was hurting them, drawing their fire away from him and toward the open ground where they couldn't use their superior numbers effectively. You know, he called to her as plasma bolts sizzled past his head. For an empress of shadow and terror, you're not half bad at this guerrilla warfare thing. I learned from the best, she called back, cutting through a hunter's armor with the plasma torch. Spent 2 years with the Outer Rim Resistance before they made me their poster child. Yeah? Well, I learned from my abuela, and she could make a souffle while dodging creditors. He pulled a handful of his special spice blend from his emergency kit and threw it at the nearest hunter. The man's helmet filters immediately clogged, and he stumbled backward, choking. The fight devolved into chaos. The hunters trying to maintain formation while half-blind and dealing with terrain they didn't know, Nix moving between them like she'd been doing this her entire life, and Tomas providing what his grandfather would have called aggressive support with whatever kitchen implements came to hand. It was over in 5 minutes, When the dust settled, literally and figuratively, 12 hunters lay unconscious or disabled around the clearing. None of them were seriously hurt. Nix had been precise, professional, taking them down without permanent damage. Not bad for a day's work, Tomas said, surveying the aftermath, though I'm definitely going to have to file an insurance claim. Nix was standing in the middle of the clearing, the plasma cutter hanging loose in her grip, staring at the disabled hunters like she couldn't quite believe what had happened. "We won," she said, and there was something almost wondering in her voice. "Of course we won. What did you expect? I expected to fight alone. I expected to kill them all. I expected—" She trailed off, then looked at him with those impossible dark eyes. "Why did you help me?" Tomas shrugged, already mentally calculating how long it would take to get his cart operational again. "I told you, you're my customer. I'm a wanted criminal, a killer. They call me the ghost of the outer rim because I phase between dimensions and murder people in their sleep. Yeah, and I call you the lady who ordered the beef empanadas and paid in advance." He started walking back toward his cart, stepping over unconscious hunters. "Speaking of which, you still want those? They're probably cold by now, but I can heat them up." She followed him, moving with that fluid grace that suggested she'd never quite gotten used to dealing with gravity. "You don't understand. I've killed hundreds of people. Slavers and pirates, from what I hear." He started checking his equipment for damage, mentally cataloging what needed repair. "My cousin Miguel killed more than that in the corporate wars, and nobody calls him a monster. They gave him a medal and a pension. It's not the same, isn't it?" He turned to look at her, really look, and for the first time saw past the impossible eyes and shadow-touched skin to something that looked remarkably like a tired young woman carrying too much weight. "You freed 4,000 people. You fight slavers and pirates. You could have killed these pendejos, but you didn't. Seems to me like you're doing the work nobody else wants to do and taking the blame nobody else wants to carry." She was quiet for a long time, watching him work. Finally, she said, "They're afraid of me." "Yeah, well, people are afraid of lots of things. Doesn't make those things evil." He got the heating unit working again, started warming up a fresh batch of empanadas. "My grandmother used to say that fear and respect look the same from the outside, but they feel different from the inside." "What does that mean?" "Means maybe the question isn't whether people are afraid of you. Maybe the question is whether you're afraid of yourself." She went very still, and for a moment the shadows around her seemed to deepen. Then slowly she sat down on the small bench beside his cart, carefully like she was afraid of breaking something. "I haven't laughed in 3 years, she said quietly. "Well, that's a damn shame. You've got a nice laugh. I haven't had a conversation that wasn't about strategy or killing or running in twice that long. Also a shame. You're good company when you're not bleeding exotic fluids on my workspace." She looked up at him, and for the first time since, she'd torn through reality into his cart. She smiled. It was small, tentative, like she'd forgotten how the muscles worked, but it was real. "What's your name?" she asked. "Tomas Castillo, purveyor of the finest empanadas this side of the Meridian Gap." He handed her a plate with 3 perfectly golden pastries. "And you're Nix, my customer who's about to discover what real food tastes like." She took a bite and her eyes widened. "This is amazing, right? Secret ingredient is actual care and attention. Most people don't bother with either anymore." For the next hour, as the sun set over the clearing full of unconscious bounty hunters, the ghost of the outer rim sat on a bench outside a food cart and ate empanadas, while a middle-aged cook told her stories about his grandmother's adventures in the corporate wars. She laughed 17 times, and with each one the shadows around her seemed a little less hungry, a little more like simple darkness waiting for dawn.